Council's Committee of the Whole from Monday, October 10th under item 1. Call to order 1.1. Welcome and roll call.
Weigel. Selsky. Weber.
Here.
Lunsky. Kavami.
Here.
Sandy.
Here.
Dean. Here. We have a quorum.
Great. Before we get into discussion items, I did want to mention that the City of Grand Forks is celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day today. There is an event at the Museum of Art from 5:30 to 8:30 tonight for those that might be interested. The City of Grand Forks did a resolution related to the Indigenous Peoples Day a few years back, and I'd like to read a small portion of it for everyone's edification on where the City of Grand Forks stands. Whereas the City of Grand Forks works to strengthen the Native American, American Indian, First Nation, and Indigenous community by promoting understanding, recognition, and respect for cultures, and to enrich the community as a whole, and support empathy, integrity, humility, good stewardship of resources, fostering fellowship, and familial cohesion. And whereas the City of Grand Forks recognizes that Grand Forks was built upon the homelands and villages of the Indigenous peoples of the region, without whom the building of the city would not have been possible. And whereas the City of Grand Forks understands that in order to help close the equity gap, government entities, organizations, and other public institutions should change their policies and practices to better reflect the experiences of Indigenous peoples and uplift our country's Indigenous roots, history, and contributions, as well as truthfully acknowledge the history of actions taken that created that gap. Now therefore be it resolved that the City of Grand Forks shall continue its efforts to promote the well-being of the Grand Forks Native American, American Indian, First Nations, and Indigenous community, and be it further resolved that Indigenous Peoples Day shall be an opportunity to celebrate the thriving cultures and positive values of the Indigenous peoples of our region, and therefore be it finally resolved that the City of Grand Forks, that by the City Council of the City of Grand Forks and the City of Grand Forks shall proclaim the second Monday of October to be Indigenous Peoples Day. Thank you.
President Sandy, if I may.
Mr. Weber.
Grand Forks was the first city in the state to proudly fly the tribal flags. Those are not here tonight because it's my understanding we've loaned them to the North Dakota Museum of Art for this evening's celebration. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. So normally those flags would be displayed behind us. And so they are at the event tonight at the Museum of Art. For those interested and able, they should go to the Museum of Art on the beautiful UND campus to take part in that event. I'd also like to notify the public that unfortunately there was a fatal car accident tonight or this afternoon by the what am I trying to say? By the landfill, thank you, by the scale at the landfill. Unfortunately, it was a fatal accident, so I don't know any more of the details, but certainly there weren't any city employees involved, and certainly our thoughts go out to those involved in that accident. Under item 2, discussion items, item 2.1, alcohol license ownership change for class 1 general on and off sale alcohol beverage license held by Denny's Tavern, doing business as Denny's Tavern. Ms. Dorstad, good evening.
Thank you, President Sandy, members of the committee. Finance Department is in receipt of a request of ownership change for a class 1 that's on and off sale alcoholic beverage license held by Denny's Tavern. This is a request of Delphine Lemoyne, and she's requested to pass her ownership on to her sons, Steve and David. City Code defines ownership changes of 50% or more considered a transfer of ownership, and a fee would apply unless an exception is met per City Code, and one of those exceptions is for a transfer to a blood relative of the first degree, and this meets that exception. So no fee applies to this change, but change of ownership of an alcoholic beverage license does require the review and approval by City Council, so we're bringing this forward to you. Attached also with the staff report is the letter from Delphine Lemoyne, personal information of Steve and David Lemoyne, and also a copy of that City Code section as it relates to transfer. But with that, we would recommend move this forward for approval.
Thank you, Ms. Dorstad. Any comments or questions? Moved by Veen, second by Kavami. Any other comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Item 2.2, discussion of meeting streaming methods. Mr. Bernstrom.
Council President Sandy, members of the council. Mr. Sandy, you and I have had this conversation, and I'm sorry I missed last Monday. Councilmember Osowski, I understand you had a question. So the city of Grand Forks, when we broadcast these meetings, we put them on Government Access Channel 2, which is through Midco, and then we also stream it through Facebook. I want to eliminate a misconception that you need to have a Facebook account in order to view the stream. You do not. We have set up our Facebook account to all of our posts are public, so anyone can just go to the website, and we have a link on our website to get you there to view all of our content on our Facebook page without an account. If you have an account, you can comment, share, all that fun stuff. Without an account, you can just view it. Just a quick history of our streaming. We started streaming in 2018. Not gonna lie, it was a bumpy road. We had some equipment issues, and it was kind of a square peg round hole a little bit. And in 2019, we did some equipment upgrades in our back there. We upgraded some cameras and our production equipment. We bought a software called vMix. We did that in 2019. That made streaming a lot easier, but there are still a lot of spinning plates back there during a production. And then with COVID and having meetings we have some people on Zoom, some people in person, that was another layer. So we made the decision then to just have the link to our Facebook page, and it was a decision made by our department. We didn't necessarily run this up to anybody. We just have the link to our Facebook page, knowing that our content was able to be viewed without an account. That way we weren't constantly changing the streaming link, which is unique to each Facebook post. So we chose Facebook at that time. We picked at that time we could only stream to one, and we picked the social media platform that we were hoping to grow the fastest. At that time, Facebook, we maybe had 1,500 followers, we're up to 17,000. So when we have a snowstorm or flooding or whatever, we put information up there, we know we're getting it to a pretty large audience. So that is kind of the history of the stream. If I could show you real quick, as you take a look at your screen, you can see that no one on this computer is logged into Facebook. This is under government, meeting videos, watch meetings live, and since this is going live, you can see the feed right there. So that is, to your point, Councilmember Osowski, of streaming it directly to the website. It's a bit of a workaround on our part and something that is permanently there that we don't always have to change. So that's kind of a history of our streaming of meetings. If I'm open to any questions, if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstrom. Questions by the council? Yes, Ms. Osowski.
Are there other options, or are you just saying that this is it?
We could push to YouTube. We do have that streaming availability now that with our new production equipment. Our YouTube followers is about in a couple hundred. Facebook is 17,000. That I feel that it's one less thing to do. Than pushing to multiple streams. One less thing to keep an eye on. Again, there's lots of spinning plates back there. So that is why we chose just the one.
So are you saying that you're not going to pursue having it streamed live from the website?
Well, it would...
Because it's too much work?
Well, it would take, so Facebook is our mechanism for streaming, right? So if we don't do Facebook, and that's fine, we would have to find another mechanism to stream. It would be, whether it be software, may even involve some hardware. Is it fair to assume, Councilmember Osowski, that you're looking at to be the website only?
I mean, I was able to get on here, although I don't have a Facebook account or anything like that. I just know that there have been other complaints about it, and I don't know why we can't stream it directly to the website in 2022. Or why can't we stream it multiple places? How much additional work does it take to stream it in multiple places?
It takes a little bit of work. I'm not going to sit here, but it is something we can take a look at. And then specifically with our council remodel, we are having some meetings coming up here at the end of the month, discussing specifically AV,
Okay.
audio and visual. So we can have further discussions there. I don't want to say yes and I don't want to say no because I don't necessarily know the answer to that question.
Okay.
John, didn't we stream directly to our website prior to 2018? Prior to taking it to Facebook, we did stream directly on our webpage.
That was, we had different Channel 2 equipment then. They gave us an embed code that was consistent throughout. We changed that equipment as well, and that changed that operation as well.
Sure. But we did
We
stream
did,
it to our
it
website.
was.
And it was all archived on our website as well, where you could go back and find the previous videos and.
We still have that as well, the meeting archive, yes.
Yep. But I don't think it's so much a work effort as it is a hardware and software issue.
Yes,
Right.
yeah.
So I think if Ms. Osowski wanted it streamed to our website, it's not that we can't do it, it just costs money.
There's a cost to it, yeah. And we can take a peek at that as well.
Great. Any other questions for Mr. Bernstrom?
If I may.
Yeah, Mr. Weber.
One of the concerns that I'm most frequently hear has to do with the sound quality. Do we anticipate that when we have the council chambers remodeled, the renovation here, that'll be changed, that we can anticipate an improvement there?
Councilmember Sandy, Councilmember Weber, I don't think it's a secret to anyone that the audio in this room is not great. So when we made the decision to do some of those upgrades in 2019, we looked at audio. It came to a cost thing that we needed cameras more than we needed microphones at that time. We've caught our cameras and production equipment up, which makes the microphones and speakers that stick out that much more. So yes, that is something that's probably priority number one with the remodels. I want the room to sound a lot better and a lot cleaner.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Thank you, Mr. Bernstrom. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Item 2.3, budget amendment for the fire department fiscal year 22 state homeland security grant. Chief Lorenz, how are you?
I'm well. Good
Thanks for
evening,
being here tonight.
President Sandy, members of the council. As a reminder, the city of Grand Forks is one of 4 communities in the state that provides regional response for hazardous materials and technical rescue incidents to the northeast portion of North Dakota from our community. Funding for our teams are almost all grant-related through Homeland Security funds. These Homeland Security funds are funneled down to the State Department of Emergency Services, and then we apply for grants back to the communities. Earlier this year, we had applied for such grant, and what we're asking for tonight is the acceptance of that grant funding and any necessary budget amendments to be used for the teams. This is a 100% funded, there is no match for the local for this grant.
Great. Anybody want to accept the grant? Moved by Osowski, your second by Kavami. Any other comments? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Item 2.4, wastewater fog abatement program. That's fat and grease and something else, right?
And oil.
Yeah, hi, Ms. Parby.
Good evening,
Good evening.
President, Councilmember Sandy, as well as committee members. We've been working on a program this year, kind of a pilot project, trying to do some abatement with the fats, oils, and grease that collect not only in our lift stations, but also in our sanitary sewer pipes. We've had success with this, especially in Area 5, which is most of the area through the downtown. And that lift station is over by the old Simonson's Lumber on North 3rd Street. And then we've also had success in Area 38, which is the area that is near 32nd and Columbia. And so what we're asking tonight is to approve an extension of this project throughout the end of the year so that we can continue to work on a few other areas within our sanitary sewer system to help mitigate or help reduce that fog that piles up, causes some issues, causes us to go out and have to flush or jet these areas more frequently, as well as clean those lift stations on a more regular basis. The amount tonight for the project is $38,640. The reason I'm here is because we did have a service agreement with them and have spent about $34,000 this year, so it would be over that threshold of my authority to approve. The total project will be about $73,000.
I'll move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. There's a motion. Is there a second? Second by Veen. Any other comments? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Please let the record show that Mr. Weigel joined the meeting. Thank you, Ms. Parvey. Okay, so item 2.5, wastewater treatment plant replacement pumps for reactor tanks. Ms. Parvey.
Tonight, I'm just asking to authorize the purchase of 2 pumps. These weren't in the budget. We were planning to do some improvements to the reactors throughout our facility plan and Phase 1 improvements at the wastewater treatment plant, but we have since decided to hold on that project. The pumps are in need of repair, and right now, they're $45,000 new, $25,000 to repair them. I guess one is $25,000 to repair, the other is $10,000. It just makes sense for us to purchase these new pumps and not have to have other problems with them if we do start making repairs and they get quite costly. So the total purchase is $91,798, and it is with electric pump for these 2 pumps for the reactors.
What do we do with the failing pumps?
We can either, I guess I'm not sure. We had talked about repairing one, the cheaper one, to repair for $10,000 to have a spare, but I'm not sure that we'll currently do that. I think we can just surplus those, or they can go back to the manufacturer. I'll check. I can let you know.
Any other, moved by Veen, second by Kavami. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Item 2.6, ordinance amending Grand Forks City Code Section 8-08162 as it relates to daily parking restrictions. Mr. Phelan.
Council President Sandy, excuse me. Sharon's not here tonight. Sharon Lipsa, our Public Works Operations Director, and so we're asking, there is in the ordinance, we have a maintenance map, if you will, and so we're looking to update that due to citywide growth in the community. It does require 2 readings, and so the Public Works team has taken a look at it. They're asking to modify the map due to mainly south end growth in our community. And there's a couple more edits too. It references the authority of the police chief and the superintendent of streets. We don't have a superintendent of streets, but we do have a public works operations director. So there's probably a couple minor edits on that. And the most important thing to do, I want to introduce Matt Arvig, who's in the back there with a cap. And so he's a guy who actually does something day to day. And so Matt's our public works supervisor and in the street division for our community. And so when things need to be made happen, whether it's day or night, especially during the winter months, Matt's our supervisor. He's been our supervisor for, I'm going to say, about a year plus. And yeah. And so I think he didn't, we had a tough winter last winter, and I don't know if he knew what he was getting himself into. He was used to have a quieter job, being the night lead guy, but then he did really step up and become the supervisor and really took on a lot of challenges. So with that, that's what we're trying to do here this evening. But if you have any specific questions, you should know people like Matt Arvig are really some key people that we have in our city that make things happen. So I just want to introduce him, Council President Sandy.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. So under the new map, are certain areas of town, is the parking changing? We're suggesting, so I read through it today, and it appeared that some of the people's garbage days are going to be changing as well, right? Yeah. So other than reading it here and then reading it again, how are we going to let people know?
We'll let all those specific addresses know of the change, and we'll give some time for people to adjust to it also. So there are specific areas, and we'll let all the addresses know in multiple different ways in advance of any change. Because we know garbage is important. We know how can I park, when do I park in front of my streets, and really important. So sometimes we take ourselves way too serious around here about all the strategery of the city of Grand Forks, and it really comes down to what's my garbage day and when can I park my car, and why are you changing those things. So we know that if there's something that's really going to get the general populace of the city of Grand Forks fired up, it's these kinds of things. And I don't know, Matt, why don't you come up and You're actually on the scene of a lot of crime, so why don't you let us know what you know?
I believe we're not planning on changing any garbage right now, but we have one day where the street and maintenance and garbage collection clash. So we're gonna move the street parking for that day to a different day. So their garbage collection will stay that same day and the streets will be a different day. So the cans aren't in the street when we're trying to sweep and plow.
I see. Sounds good.
Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Arvig. Arvig? No, thank you, Mr. Arvig. Nice meeting you. Thanks for coming. Any comments or questions? Or moved by Osowski. Is there a second by Kavami? Any other comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Item 2.7, Grand Forks Water Supply Update and Overview to include Red River Valley Water Supply Project related to studies and models, participation agreement, legislative strategy, drought management and demand reduction plan, and others. Mr. Phelan.
Council President Sandy and members of the community hall, last Monday, Councilmember Bean had discussed that we need to have some more thorough and thoughtful discussion on this matter. And so, I'm really appreciative. I want to introduce the entire team that's been working on this particular project. And so we're going to plan a presentation in a variety of different ways in this regard. So Council President Sandy, you named off all the things that we're going to talk about. I think this list of things that are working right now is, we've been working as a team. And so when I say a team, the City of Grand Forks, Garrison Diversion, and our partners to the south in Fargo and the general metro area. So just so you know, there's a lot of work that's done regarding the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. It's been a long-term priority for the city. And we have monthly meetings on this as a general team on this. I'm going to say the other thing with the project, and you're going to hear this evening, is probably over the last 4 years, we've made more progress on the Red River Valley Water Supply Project that's been done in the last decades. And so you're going to see that on a map. Not only have we made progress on environmental and engineering design, but we've made advancements in construction. And really, we're in line with the state of North Dakota to move this project forward from a funding and construction perspective. So you should know that we really have made a lot of progress working with all of our partners in moving this project forward. And I think when you also see, when you look at this, the slides, you're going to look at the 1930s. And so whenever I think of the 1930s, I think of President Franklin Roosevelt. And so I always think back to his quote at his first inaugural in 1933. And I think we should think about all the things that were going on in the United States of America and in the world, politically, economically, and obviously later in the 1930s, militarily. And so I just want to make a note of, when you go through all those times, and we've talked a lot about the risk, to remember what Franklin Roosevelt said back in the day, when he said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. And so I think what we've done in this case is that we've advanced the project. We have not muddled ourselves into perfection on this particular project. And we've worked as a team to move the project forward. And so I'm really proud of the team, and I'm going to introduce them. I'm going to introduce some folks that are online first that you're going to hear from. One is Elisa Brown, who's Councilmember Vian mentioned the hydrologist. So thankfully, we've been able, Lisa was able to join us from Wilson Water. So she's going to talk about these water supply slides that you have seen before. Mr. Buren is going to team up with her today. You've heard the slides go over by Mr. Buren, but really a lot of the background work has been done by Elisa Brown. She's actually going to present her slides tonight too. The other gentleman is Paul Boersma, and Paul Boersma works for Black & Veatch, and he, you've recognized his name, also is helping us from a third-party perspective on the Fufang USA wet corn mill project. But before that time, Black & Veatch was hired by Garrison Diversion to help with the engineering and planning side of the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. So that's Paul Boersma. And then I want to point out people in the crowd, I'm really thankful for people that were able to show up here this week. So I'm going to point out Dwayne DeCray. He's works on behalf of Garrison Diversion, and he's the general manager. Mary Meridian is, I'm going to say, the program manager for Garrison Diversion. And then Kip Kovar, he's the engineering manager for Garrison. And so when you talk about Garrison Diversion, and they'll describe that, the state of North Dakota had to hand the Red River Valley Water Supply Project to a quasi-state agency, and that was Garrison Diversion. So they've been leading this project on behalf of the state of North Dakota, and you'll see a lot of that language as we move forward. Steve Buren, as you well know, he's part of the Garrison Diversion consulting team, and he, obviously why I mentioned that he's working with Elisa Brown on a lot of the modeling activities. As we move forward, Tammy Norgard works for Vogel Law Firm, or she's a partner in Vogel Law Firm, and she works on behalf of Garrison Diversion, and she's going to talk about the partnership agreement. She's also, LAWA has an attorney named John Shockley. You've seen John Shockley a time or two in front of you also, and she's going to be engaging not only with Dan Gosshead, but with legal counsel in Fargo also. Sean Gaddy is in the back, and you guys well know Sean Gaddy. He and A2S Nexus, they're running the financial models regarding this project. So how much are we going to pay? How much is going to cost us on an annual basis? So that's generally the team. And I should mention, everyone that I've mentioned is working on behalf of Garrison Diversion. And so all the information that we've ever presented has all come from Garrison Diversion. So there's been conversations about maybe the city administration has created different models or anything like that. The only models that we've ever created have been through Garrison Diversion as part of the greater team. The other thing I want to notate is the city of Grand Forks administratively is very much involved in the project. Al Grasser, our city engineer, is the chair of the Technical Advisory Committee regarding the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. Maureen Storstead is the co-chair of the Finance Committee regarding the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. And Melanie Parvey, our Waterworks Director, she's co-chair of the operations group. And so we're well represented with a lot of times with our colleagues from Fargo regarding these various activities. Again, we've made this note over and over again. Really, the Red River Valley Water Supply Project is about an emergency backup water supply for the city of Grand Forks and Fargo, and it's really our insurance policy. Not only is it our insurance policy to sustain us over the next 100 years, it's also an economic development project for us so that we can sustain our industry. And we've talked a lot about getting additional natural gas to eastern North Dakota, and that's going to be really important. But it has to be run in parallel with a backup water supply project, and the state of North Dakota really has joined that if we're going to add gas to eastern North Dakota, develop further agribusiness, that we are going to need a backup long-term water supply also. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve Buren and to kind of introduce the hydrologist, and you guys can go from there. Thanks, Steve.
Mr. Buren, thanks for being here tonight.
Yes.
I should mention that Mr. Veen and I had coffee last week, and a lot of the questions that we discussed last week are what are going to be presented today. So I do appreciate everybody, all hands on deck here on a Monday night.
So President Sandy, members of the committee, Elisa Brown will be giving the presentation slides, and I'll just be adding color as we move forward. So I'll let her take over from here.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for, it's good to zoom in and meet the good folks of Grand Forks here tonight. So we're going to go ahead and just jump into the presentation and move right along. So I thought we would start by just talking a little bit, taking a bit of a step back and talk about why are we interested in building a model and using a model of the Red River. So the model that we have developed is a predictive tool, and the reason we want that tool in our toolbox is so that we can ask the model questions, and we're not just constrained at looking at historical conditions. We can use the model to help us ask questions about what might happen in the future, How would the system respond to different stresses and strains as population grows, as a drought that perhaps we haven't experienced recently might reoccur as if it were the 1930s, and how, just try and get our arms around where are our risks, where are our vulnerabilities, and how can we help fill in any of the gaps in our water supply. So that's why we need a model to help us answer these questions. The main developed for the Red River Valley Water Supply Project is to be able to evaluate the impacts on water supply for users in the Red River Valley. So the model is inclusive of not just the project participants, but of all of the water users that hold permits in the Red River Valley. In addition to that, we're accounting for a range of variables. So this gives us that predictive power to look at things outside of what we have experienced within our own limited lifetimes. So we're looking at natural hydrology spanning back to the 1930s. We're looking at water user demands and return flows. What if we look at conditions as if we were in 2015? What if we were to look at conditions as if we were in 2075, or any other range of future uses that we want to kind of query the model with? We can look at different styles of reservoir operations. And then, of course, the big piece that we've also got in the model is then what happens if we were to import supplies from, say, Missouri River? How could that change the picture for us? And for the most part, modeling is a lot of science, and the piece where I think we get a little bit of the art involved with the model is asking those questions of what are the key drivers, how to best represent those drivers of our system, and then interpreting the results, both in a way that makes sense to the engineers, to the city council, to the general public, and to everyone in between. So today we're going to talk about specifically the modeling tool for the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. The tool that we're using is called StateMod, and this is what happens when you let engineers name things. They come up with something very cheesy like StateMod. So StateMod is a water allocation modeling platform. It was actually developed by the state of Colorado to represent stream networks, water demands, water permits, and operations in the basin. So this model is not specific to Colorado. It was developed in Colorado, but it's not specific to Colorado. And so we've got it set up specifically. The one that we're going to talk about tonight is for the Red River Valley in North Dakota. The key aspect to using the StateMod platform is that it simulates the first-in-time, first-in-right prior appropriation system. So this is the system of allocating water based on your permit date. So the model takes whoever filed the oldest water permit, they get the first dibs on the water in the river, and then we march down the line to say, okay, if our oldest permit was, say, in 1950, then whoever filed a permit in 1951 is next in line, with somebody who filed a permit yesterday being last in line. So that's how the model is going to allocate the water to the users in the model. So, and the reason that Colorado developed this model was because there wasn't another platform that performed that same capability. And so this is something that is pretty typical for Western states. So that's where the genesis of that was. And I just wanted to highlight briefly some of the strengths of the StateMod platform. Because it's operating on this first-in-time, first-in-right prior appropriation system, that means that it is set up to estimate supplies and shortages to the water users that are represented in the model. And these can be consumptive users, such as municipalities and industrial users, but also looking at the flows in the river themselves, which could be critical for either recreational users or the aquatic environment. We're also looking at demand-driven reservoir operations, so looking at when Army Corps is making releases for the fish hatchery at Lake Ashtabula, when, if a drought were to occur, we would be using water from Lake Ashtabula to meet the downstream demands for the Thompson-Acker participants, such as Fargo and Grand Forks. The model can also track reusable supplies, so we're able to distinguish water that's in the river because that's what Mother Nature gave us versus water that's in the river because we imported it via a pipeline. And even after water was perhaps used a first time by a user, then what happens to the effluent that is discharged into the river? What happens to it as it moves down the system and is picked up by downstream users? And most importantly, just wanted to highlight again, the reason that we're using a model is so that we can ask lots of what-if questions. What if our demands were small? What if our demands were large? What if our demands had a different monthly pattern than they have now? These are reasons that we want to have a tool, and that's one of the strengths of state mod, is to be able to do those comparisons. So I know I'm a new face to everyone here tonight, so I thought I would just give a brief excerpt from my resume so that you guys know the kind of experience that I have and what sort of the capabilities that Wilson Water Group is bringing to the Red River Valley Water Supply team as a whole. So I always lead with Erin Wilson, who was the principal and founder of Wilson Water Group. And I'm noticing that I put 20 years of experience, but I think she might not want to admit it, but it's getting closer to 30 years of experience with state mod. So she is the leading expert on Colorado's statewide modeling efforts, having been involved since the very beginning when they were first looking at developing the state mod platform to then implementing state mod for basins and users throughout the state of Colorado. And probably one of our biggest claim to fame is that we were instrumental in the Colorado River water availability study. So this was a project led that Wilson Water Group did the modeling for the state of Colorado to use state mod to help predict future water availability, specifically looking at climate change projections. So I'm sure everyone's heard in the news how the Colorado River Basin is under a lot of stress right now, with Lake Powell and Lake Mead dropping to some of the lowest recorded levels ever. And so Wilson Water Group has been involved with modeling efforts for the state on looking at the state's risks and vulnerabilities for that system. But bringing it back to myself, I'm Elisa Brown. I have about 10 years of experience in the field here, and kind of the projects that I've listed below are different efforts where we've deployed state mod for various basins and various clients that Wilson Water Group holds here in Colorado. But enough about me. Let's get back to North Dakota and the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. So I just wanted to touch briefly on the model that we have, that we've been using. So the map on the slide here shows the geographic extent that is represented in the model. I did want to touch on our naturalized flow database. So we've got data going back to January 1931 through December 2001, so a large period of record that's incorporated in the model. And that data is using the estimate of flow that we would expect in the river if humans had not impacted the system at all. So it's trying to get at what is the water that Mother Nature would deliver. And then we're going to layer on top of that the activities of water users in the basin. So now, after we've kind of figured out the first step of what's the flow in the river, then we're looking at what are the water users and what are their permits. Always important to make sure we get the permit piece in there, since we're stimulating that first in time, first in right system. And then we're looking at specifically where I've been spending quite a bit of my effort is on Lake Ashtabula Reservoir operations, making sure we're appropriately representing what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, how their water control manual states that they will operate the reservoir, and all the complications that go into that. And then finally, the big piece for the Red River Valley Water Supply specifically is to make sure that we are incorporating that project water supply imports into the model to show how those supplies would be used by water users, both the consumptive users, and then also making sure we're meeting our aquatic requirements as well. So I just wanted to give a brief background on the model itself so people understand kind of where it's been and how far it's come. The model was initially developed in the early 2000s by the Bureau of Reclamation. This was back when a version of the Red River Valley Water Supply Project was a federally led effort. Once the state of North Dakota kind of picked up the banner and said, well, we're going to do this as a state-led effort as opposed to a federal-led effort, there was a reconfiguration and an update of the model to make sure that we still had everything as current, up to date as possible. So the big piece of that was working with the potential project participants to make sure that we had domestic and industrial water demands forecasted, those projections out to a 2075 planning horizon. And so that's making sure that we're forward-looking into the future. The other big piece of that was working with the state of North Dakota to update the water appropriation permits to make sure that we had captured all of the changes in the permit database that had occurred since reclamation initially got the model up and running. Anything that had happened in the sort of ensuing 15 years, get that all in there. One of the things that we did was also incorporate transit loss. So that's sort of a little bit more in the weeds, but when you release water from a reservoir, if you release 10 CFS, you're not always going to get 10 CFS at your intake. So making sure that we've got that correctly represented in the model. And then we did a whole suite of sensitivity analysis and model validation to make sure that we understood what the model was doing, that we were comfortable with the representation that was in there. And as we went through that process, making tweaks and updates as we found and identified any small issues that needed to be dealt with so that we had confidence that the model could be used to help us size the project pipeline, which was really one of the key aspects of developing the model, to make sure that we understood the capacity that the pipe needed to have in order to meet all of the objectives of the project. More recently, we've done a review and an update of the model, again, looking basically starting last year. But we got some additional information from Army Corps as to how Lake Ashtabula should be represented, so we got that incorporated. And then just through the good work of the team, trying to make sure that we're appropriately and accurately representing all of the project participants, making sure that we had that reflected in the model, and then completed several additional sensitivity analyses as different questions arose throughout the past couple of years. So that's where we've been, and here we are today. So I think the big question in everyone's mind always when dealing with the model is it accurate? Is it giving us the information that we need? And the short answer is yes. So the original model was calibrated by Reclamation, and that was determined to be accurate for the purposes of the EIS. And really, our team started with that solid platform of the model, and then did a comparative analysis using the 2015 demands and the simulated stream flow that the model was producing, and compared that to the observed stream flow in recent years, which provided us with the confidence that the model is representative of the Red River Valley system. And recently and throughout, we've also been doing sensitivity analyses to evaluate the impacts of different model parameters on the model performance, which helped confirm our modeling approach. So the team has confidence that the model is giving us the information that we need to be able to appropriately size the pipeline and evaluate the impacts to the project participants. So just in conclusion, on my state mod portion, we've got a powerful tool that helps us understand and test different flow conditions for the Red River Valley. The recent model review that we've completed in the past couple of years has reinforced our confidence in the project sizing. And this model is available and continually to be used as we're finalizing any of the details with project size and then our future predictive analysis. Steve, did you have any additional thoughts that you wanted to throw in here?
No, I think I probably will add more color as we get into some of the details as it impacts the users. Thank you. You did a very good job of summarizing a not very exciting subject in a brief fashion. So.
Sounds good. So the next portion of our presentation is going to be more focused on Grand Forks specifically. So Grand Forks is one of the key project participants in the Red River Valley water supply. So we have definitely, as a team, has been trying to make sure that we understand the uses, how the system operates, and make sure that we've got that appropriately represented in the model. So for Grand Forks, the demands for the city are met by supplies in the following order. We use first the permit on the Red Lake River, then we use the permit on the Red River. We also have the ability in the model to track which water in the Red River would have been there from natural flows anyway, and which water is in the river because it was actually used previously by Fargo, and then that is an effluent return flow into the system. So we're able to kind of distinguish between those two different colors of water, if you will, in the river. If you were just to stand on the banks of the river, it would not be different colored, but that is a trick of the model. So we're tracking that, and then we also have the ability to release that Thompson Acker waters that's been stored in Lake Ashtabula for the benefit of Grand Forks. And then finally, I've kind of draw a line here. Those are all of the things that the model represents if we're looking at a no project scenario. If we're considering the impacts of the project, then the last piece would be if there were still shortages to Grand Forks, we would supply project water directly to the city. And I did just want to highlight that because we're utilizing those return flows from Fargo, we're making sure to optimize the use of project water for users in the system. Okay, so I think we've been meeting with Grand Forks. I say we, the team, has been meeting with Grand Forks to try and keep you guys appraised as to developments in the project. So back in May of this year, there was a meeting with city leadership where we discussed no project scenarios. So this is really where the model can come into play to help the city evaluate where their risks are. So the risk being if the project is not fully constructed, what could happen to Grand Forks water supply in the event of a 1930s style drought. And then we can get a little more detailed beyond that. There's a sort of an outstanding question as to exactly how Lake Ashtabula would be operated in an extreme drought condition. So right now, the Army Corps of Engineers, their standard operating procedure is to make sure that Lake Ashtabula is not drained below the top of the fish and wildlife pool. So they want to maintain some storage in that reservoir so it's not completely empty in order to have some habitat for the fish and wildlife that live in the reservoir. But if we were to get into a severe drought condition, there is always the possibility that water could be pulled down even below that level that Army Corps is targeting in order to make releases to downstream users. So kind of one of the things that we can use the model to do is look at, well, what would the impact to Grand Forks be if we are stuck with maintaining that wildlife pool, or what if we can pull it all the way down to empty? So that's kind of a question of what are the impacts of policy decisions on the city. The other question that we were looking at was, there's some anecdotal evidence that the Red Lake River is that in sync with the Red River or out of sync with the Red River in terms of when are droughts occurring? So a worst case scenario would be if the Red Lake River was producing essentially zero flow by the time we got down to Grand Forks' intake, as compared to what if we were able to have a slightly more reliable supply out of the Red Lake River. So those were sort of the initial kind of toggles that we wanted to look at in the model to try and help understand where the risks were for Grand Forks. And that was kind of what was explored at that initial May meeting. And yes, I am the modeler behind the scenes here. They've dragged me out of my hidey hole for this presentation. But so yes, I've been doing the modeling work that has been presented to the city so far.
And maybe just two things to stress on this particular slide. In terms of the Red Lake River itself, since the Bureau of Reclamation initially presented the Red Lake River in the federal project, there's always been a little bit of a gut feeling by Grand Forks that it didn't make sense. And since we made these model runs in May, we did identify an apparent error in the naturalized flow database where the Thief River node, a point in the model, has too much flow in it. And we went back and compared that node in 2021 to what is showing in the naturalized flow database, and there was almost no water at that node like we would expect. And so in these subsequent runs that we did, that we presented to you in August, we took out that excess of Red Lake River water, and so that clears up that nagging gut feeling that we've had for over 20 years. The other thing is that everything that was done in May is captured by the bookends of what was done in August. So as Lisa moves to the August presentation that I gave to you, all of these scenarios fall within that, the extremes of what we presented in August. So there is nothing from the May presentation that wasn't covered in August.
Thanks, Steve. So with that introduction, we'll jump into the results of we're calling them our bookend models that we first talked about in August. So the primary question that we're trying to answer with the model right now are the water supplies projected to be adequate during a 1930s or 1980s style drought with either 2015 or 2075 demands for Grand Forks? So that is a hefty question, but that is why we have the model. So we can look at this a lot of different ways, but basically what we have narrowed it down to were no project scenarios. So what if we didn't build the project? What are the risks to Grand Forks' water supplies without the project? And we've kind of broken it into this 2075 demand level, and then we've got our two bookends of saying, here's sort of a dire condition in terms of the water supply, and here's perhaps less dire but still realistic options for the water supply for Grand Forks. And then that next step is, well, 2015 demands, and we also looked at 2015 plus the anticipated use of the Fufeng industrial user. Again, with those two bookends of what could the water supply conditions look like. So let's walk through 2075 demands. So these would be demands greater than the city has today, because by 2075 we anticipate growth in the municipality and then also additional industrial users. So our first option, our kind of scenario one, this is where we're looking at pretty dire conditions for the water supply. We're saying the project's not built, and we're also taking that Red Lake River flows all the way to zero. So that is a pretty severe cut to the water supplies of Grand Forks. And then the other piece that we're saying is that what if Lake Ashtabula cannot be drained below the fish and wildlife pool? So that's going to limit the ability of Grand Forks to access the Thompson Acker water. And then the other piece that we added on was a minimum bypass on the Red River of 23 CFS. So these are sort of three levels of kind of toggling the different switches to say this would be a pretty dire situation for the water supply for Grand Forks. On our other end of the spectrum, we're saying, okay, the project's still not built, but what if we have some outflow on Red Lake River? So as Steve discussed, we're talking about the outflow just from the Red Lake River Dam being available. And then we're saying, what if Lake Ashtabula can't actually be drained all the way to the bottom? So that gives Grand Forks access to much more of the Thompson Acker water that's stored behind Lake Ashtabula. And then we're not setting any kind of minimum bypass on the Red River. So those are sort of the switches that we've toggled here. And let's go ahead and jump to some of the results. So for our dire situation, we're looking at, let me just walk through this graph with you guys here. So what we're saying is we've got our 2075 demands. So you'll see like the top of the graph is almost at 3,500 acre feet as sort of that peak month demand there. The blue shows areas where we are diverting water from the Red River itself. So that's an indication of supply. The yellow is when the city is basically living off of Fargo's return flows from their Thompson Acker water. And then in this case, you'll notice that there's an option for Grand Forks from Lake Ashtabula. And I think there's a teeny tiny little sliver of green in basically 1 month but without being able to dip into that fish and wildlife pool, we're severely limited in the amount of water that can be delivered from Lake Ashtabula. So we have almost no supplies from Lake Ashtabula, which leaves us with the black, which is the shortages to the city's demand. So this is times, so anytime you see black on the slide, that's when we're showing that the demand with those 2075 projections is not able to be satisfied. So this is a pretty severe water shortage scenario for Grand Forks, definitely.
You didn't mention, Lisa, but it's probably pretty clear that this is for the 1930s drought event, which is the most severe drought event of record.
Steve? So let's look at our other bookend, which is a slightly more optimistic view on the water supply situation. So again, that same time period, 1931, and we kind of zoomed in through 42 to kind of look at that severe drought period. We're still at our 2075 demand levels. You'll see we've got a lot more red on this graph. So red indicates that we've been able to divert water from the Red Lake River. So that is helping to provide additional supply to the city. And then you'll see there's a lot more green on this slide as well, which is because we're allowing that water to be released from Lake Ashtabula below the Fish and Wildlife Pool, which gives the city access to those additional supplies there. And really, we've only got shortages now in sort of a couple of critical months right during the winter of 1936, 1937, being the period where basically we've run out of supplies in Lake Ashtabula to support those 2075 demands for Grand Forks. So not nearly as dire as our most severe bookend on this side, our other bookend over here. We still do have some shortages without the project, but not quite as dire. But this is still a pretty serious situation that the city would probably want to avoid.
And just for comparison's sake, when the federal model was presented, they had that red line going solid across at about 800 acre feet every month for the entire 1930s drought. And that was the part that just didn't pass the litmus test for us. And then when we caught that error, we compared the subsequent water availability to a model that the Corps had done after the 1930s, and they correlated quite well. And so we feel much more confident that using some Red Lake River water, but using it at this level and recognizing that in some of the critical areas it won't be available is a prudent step.
Okay, so those results that we just looked at were the projections for 2075 demands. Now we're going to bring it a little bit closer to current conditions and look at 2015 demands plus a Fufang style industrial user. And again, these are with no projects constructed. So again, we're dealing with our more dire water supply situation is, again, taking that Red Lake River all the way to zero, saying that we got to hold Lake Ashtabula at the Fish and Wildlife Pool, which is going to keep some of Grand Forks' supplies in the reservoir. And we're going to impose a minimum bypass on the Red River of 23 CFS. For our less dire, but still realistic water supply scenario for our other bookend, we're looking at what Steve was talking about, that outflow from the Red Lake River. Some outflow is available. Lake Ashtabula can be taken all the way down to the bottom, and we're going to impose no minimum bypass on the Red River. So let's go ahead and take a look at these. So again, we're focusing in on that 1931 through 1942 period as that severe drought of the 1930s. You'll notice we've got lower demands right off the bat. Our 2015 demands plus Fufang is a little over 1,000 acre feet, less in those peak months than what we're projecting for the 2075 conditions. So for our more dire scenario where we're saying there's no Red Lake River water, we don't have any red on the graph, so we're relying on whatever supplies we can get from Red River. Return flows generated by Fargo's use of their Thompson Aquifer water, and then Grand Forks in green with the Thompson Aquifer water released from Lake Ashtabula specifically for Grand Forks. And then we do still have shortages. So we do have some shortages popping up sort of as we move through the drought, and those supplies in Lake Ashtabula are either exhausted or trapped in the Fish and Wildlife pool. In contrast, well, Steve, I'll let you take this slide here.
So one of the other things that's been concerning for the council is that we've presented this water model, and there's also been some statistics presented where we looked at gauge data from the river. And this is maybe a good way to reconcile this. At the last meeting where I presented before you, Mayor Bochinsky had asked me to look at what some water availability statistics would look like if we focus on the period after they built Lake Ashtabula, which was built in the early 1950s. And I stood before you and explained that there was a pretty copious amount of water supply available from those statistics. This would be another way of looking at it, where all of the full robustness and depth of the model was also used to superimpose 2015 demands plus Fufang over the naturalized flow database from 1931 to 2001. And you can see those black shortages that we saw in the 1930s on the previous graphic reappear here, but you can see after 1941 that the model does not suggest that there'd be any shortages, which is very consistent with those statistics that were previously presented.
Yep, and then going back to the model results for the 1930s, if we kind of look at our other bookend output here, we're looking at, now we are having some supplies from the Red Lake River, not a full supply all the time, but some supplies from the Red Lake River. And then in addition to those, we're still pulling from the Red River. We've got return flows that Fargo's generating from their use of Lake Ashtabula water. We've got access to Grand Forks's Lake Ashtabula water stored in the Thompson Acker. And in this case, there are no shortages reported by the model for this particular scenario.
And just to caution everybody, this does not negate the importance of the Red River Valley Water Supply Project, because that's based on a 2075 planning horizon. This was more to ask the city's question, should you build Fufang with current demands? How serious do we think the near-term shortages may be? And it goes from under a kind of a dire situation looking like this to, if we look at a more optimistic / realistic approach, this would be the other end of looking at that.
Yep. And then just to wrap it up, we did want to throw in one result showing what would happen if we turned the project on. So this is then our results with the project, and we're seeing that we would, and this is going back to the 2075 demand levels. So even with those larger demands that we're anticipating by 2075, with the project, we are able to fully supply Grand Forks and all of the other project users as well to fully satisfy those 2075 demands. And now I think we're going to hand it off to our next set of presenters, but I will be available at the end if there's any questions on the modeling portion.
President Sandy and members of the council, I'm Tammy Norgard. I'm an attorney with the Vogel Law Firm. I'm in our Fargo office. We also have an office here in Grand Forks. I've been working with Garrison Diversion for 21 years on this project through the federal project, and then when we transitioned to a state project. I've worked on, there's been 4 prior agreements that you've signed on to with the development agreement and the financing agreements initially, bringing us to this point, which will be the 5th agreement. I've sent a copy of the project participation agreement to your attorney, as well as John Shockley, who is representing Lake Agassiz Water Supply Authority, and that's where your council member Buren is the vice chair, I believe, of Lake Agassiz Water Authority. And so your attorney, Fargo's attorney, and John Shockley have had an opportunity to review this draft. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like 75 pages, very dense document, lots of legalese. But that's kind of where we're at and what we'll be talking about moving forward. I just to give you an overview of basically what the project participation agreement is compiled of. And really, there's kind of an overview, the idea of who does what, who's in charge of what. And Garrison Diversion is owning, operating, and maintaining the project. And it's in consultation with Lake Agassiz. So your voice is important on the Lake Agassiz board. And this is basically a negotiation between Garrison's making the decisions and financing the project and constructing the project, but it's with input from Lake Agassiz Water Authority. So you definitely have a role in that. The project itself, or the agreement itself, deals with construction, how it's constructed. It talks about how it's financed. It addresses the cost share with the state, because the state is definitely a big partner here with what's anticipated to be probably a 75% cost share on the state in this project. And then we'll move to the water supply portion of the agreement, which is how much water do you want? And when is it going to be available, in what rates, and what peak day demands, and then kind of goes through operation and maintenance and what's going to be expected of the project in terms of Garrison will operate and maintain it. And so we go through, 75 pages of all these items of we tried to button down everything we could think about, and we kept thinking about new things and kept drafting more. But just so that we didn't have any misunderstandings later on. We want it as detailed, and we want you to understand what you're signing. And so that's where, with this agreement, there's a lot of information in the agreement, but then what we identified is that we really needed to put the meat of this into exhibits. And so we have a number of exhibits that actually will be sent out tomorrow to your attorney. And this is something that I think I sent your attorney the agreement itself in July, and that's been reviewed. But, the meat of this is largely in the exhibits in terms of some of the things you're going to want to know, which is, when is my water available? Where do I withdraw it? Exhibit C, the prior expenses of the participants, because Garrison has pre-funded some of it, Fargo has, and Grand Forks. And so for that pre-funding, it's going to get reshuffled when we figure out who's going to be part of the project. It basically gets trued up because you guys were kind enough to advance some of the money. It's all going to get trued up. So that's going to be identified in this agreement. Exhibit D, the capital cost responsibility, just identifies what's the allocation model. For any new bond issue or any new work plan, how much of that is everybody going to pay? So that's going to be bulleted out. There's O&M cost responsibilities. That's all bulleted out of who pays for what for O&M into the future. Exhibit F is state mod, which you've heard a lot about, and I'll address in just a second. Exhibit G, the operation and maintenance framework. That's something that, what we really thought is we want to make sure that you understand how the project will be operated, how it will be maintained, what the assumptions are, like with Exhibit F, which is state mod, and that's where we're going through this information with you tonight, because it would be easy not to have that anywhere, but we thought it was really important for you to understand, what assumptions were in the model, so that you didn't later think, well, what water was I supposed to use first? I didn't realize this is the way it worked. I didn't realize that there's a bypass requirement of 23 CFS. And from our perspective at Garrison, it was an idea that we want everybody to understand as much of this as possible, so you know what you're signing on to, so that in 10 years, if there's any kind of a concern, that we can look back and say, this is what we all expected was going to happen. And especially with modeling, you never know what the future is going to bring in terms of climate issues and water supplies and river levels. But what we're doing is the best that we can find today based on history, hopefully, understanding how history will repeat itself and how the project will respond in those scenarios. And then Exhibit H, the last one I'll talk about, is just debt repayment obligations. What that is that it identifies what do you owe today. And so anytime there's a new bond issue, new work plan, then it's going to be updated to say, well, here's your payments now. Here's your monthly, quarterly, yearly payments at that point in time. So this is the exhibits are very important. We have done a preview of the exhibits with all the users, including Grand Forks, in May and June, just kind of the summary of how we were detailing those. And then we decided we need, detailed attachments for these exhibits, narrative form, just so that you can all understand how state mod works, for instance. And this is where you already heard about all that's going into state mod. And again, we just want to be transparent to make sure that you understand the assumptions that the project is based on. So from a timeline perspective, we are hoping that we can get some signatures on the project participation agreement by the time the legislature meets, because we will be asking for significant funding from the legislature, and it's going to be a lot easier to request significant funding, if we can tell them we do have people that are invested and willing to support this and that are ready to move forward with the project. So that's been our goal, is we'd really like to, in the next few months, finalize the agreement. We'd appreciate your input, and we've been very open, working with, like John Shockley, for instance, with Lake Agassiz. I gave him the first draft of the project participation agreement a year ago. So we went through a year of fine-tuning the language before we even sent it out to the other attorneys. So with that, I will turn it over to, I believe, Mary Meridian, and Dwayne DeCray will be talking about legislative strategy.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm Dwayne DeCray, the General Manager of Garrison Diversion, and I have with me tonight Mary Meridian, who's one of the project deputies. I work for a 28-member board, so if you're wondering who's watching this team besides yourselves, we have a 28-member board that we answer to that's very active. And so we're probably the two faces that the legislature sees the most, but we often ask for your mayor's help down in the legislature and also the mayor of Fargo. And with that, I'll let Mary go through some slides.
Sure, and I'll just, Mr. President, City Council members, just introduce myself quickly. I am Mary Meridian. Dwayne talked about what I kind of work on, but with the Red River Valley Water Supply Project, I really focus on the legislative efforts with Dwayne and then on the financial side of it. We're not covering that much on the financial side, but just wanted to give you a little bit of background on that. I work really close with Sean Gaddy and his team at AE2S Nexus, and your finance director, Maureen, is our financial advisory co-chair, so I do work with Buren as well. So getting ready for this upcoming legislative session, we are asking the state for a commitment to the project beyond just the 23-25 biennium work plan. The state's been a vital partner in the project. They've been committing funding to the project, but we want them to give us some legislative intent to fully commit to this project and finish the project. Our request for the 23-25 biennium is $255 million from the state. That's a total draft work plan of $340 million. We are looking at that 75% state cost share, 25% local. My next map will actually show what, I guess that I forgot we put that one. I'm going to be showing what we are going to be doing with that $339 million. But first of all, I wanted to put this in here. For the last 2 years, I'm kind of getting over this now, but I would start out every presentation that I started that we are under construction. I've been working for Garrison Diversion for almost 20 years, and my very first week on the job was with the federal government trying to do the federal project. So it's been a long time coming to get this project going. We have roughly about $90 million in construction efforts ongoing, 5 contracts. I'll just quickly say that there's a Missouri River intake wet well and tunnel and screen structure that's going. We have contract 5A, which is 72-inch pipeline, our main transmission pipeline. It's a little over 1 mile. That has been completed. That's just south of Carrington. And currently going is an additional 9 miles of that 72-inch pipeline, contract 5B, and that's going to the east of Carrington, a little south and east of there. And then the outfall on the Cheyenne River, that is completed. So we have 2 completed construction projects, a couple that are underway and a couple that are almost substantially complete. So the state and locals have been committed to this project, and this upcoming biennium, we're looking for a further commitment. So back to that work plan for 23-25, it's a total of a $339 million work plan, as I stated. We hope to do construction on contract 5C and D and construction on contract 6, and that is basically around the Carrington area and then heading towards Cooperstown. And then we want to do final design on contract 7 and contract 4. Contract 7 will get us to the outfall, and contract 4 will start heading west towards the McCluskey Canal. And then start doing some more design, or start design on the NDOS portion of this and the Biota Water Treatment Plant and McCluskey Canal intake. A little bit of just a background that we didn't, I know that you've seen a lot of presentations on this project, but if we are able to go to the McCluskey Canal, it's a total of a $1.09 billion project. And so far, the city of Grand Forks at that amount would be, you are currently 14.4% of the project, and that would be roughly $40 million that you would be committing when the project participation agreements come out. To date, your investment and everything that I've talked about with the construction and all of the planning and design efforts is $3.76 million is how much you've either invested or committed to through our first 3 financial series. One of the things that we wanted to look at is this isn't a very expensive project. We all do know that. It's a very much needed and vital project. But if we were to just get, I don't want to say just get, because $150 million a biennium is a lot of money. But if we were to get $150 million per biennium, if we were doing the NDOS project, which is what we're looking towards, it would take 16 years to complete this project. So $150 million isn't going to quite get this project done in an efficient manner and a cost savings manner. And additionally, besides those primary efforts that we're going to ask from the legislature of intent for the project is that to keep this project affordable for users. Last biennium, we were able to get approved a 40-year loan at 2% interest. We also want to expand that and request to expand it with some debt sculpting so that cities that are projecting out to 2075 and you want to grow into your demand so that we can sculpt your payments so that you can grow into the payments. That's going to be one of our asks. We have a lot of industrial nominations for this project for economic development. And to save users some money on that is we're asking the state to carry some of those costs. Then if industry is able to come in or economic development, that system would repay the state. The state wouldn't be paying for it, they would just be carrying it so that we don't lose out on any economic development. And then to continue with that NDOS component and actually using the NDOS going to the McCluskey Canal will save $300 million in capital costs, but just as important for users is there's a much lower lift that we'd have to do from the McCluskey Canal, so it would be saving a lot of operations and maintenance and pumping costs for the users as well. Our legislative strategy development, we're all gearing up for the legislative session in January, but it's always an ongoing effort that we're doing. We regularly report to the North Dakota Legislative Water Topics Overview Committee. They generally meet quarterly. We are always on their agenda. We do individual meetings with legislative leadership. Because a lot of people know that the legislature is changing a lot, but we do meet with the legislative leadership. We've recently been meeting with Senator Sorvag from the Fargo area. He's on appropriations, and he's actually working and requesting legislative intent for this project so that we can have a fully funded project. We have quarterly legislative strategy meetings with our Lake Agassiz Water Authority and Garrison Diversion leadership. We have submitted official comments to the State Water Commission on their cost share policy. We continue to talk with Bank of North Dakota on best financing discussions. I talked about that debt sculpting. And then we've been meeting with Senator Kramer and Senator Hoven's office to see if there's any possibility of any federal funding for this project for the federal portion of it. And that is a quick wrap of some legislative efforts that we're working on. Like I said, they're always ongoing, and then I'll turn it over to the next presenter.
Thank you so much.
As an update, we've been working on the drought management and demand reduction portion of the project for the city of Grand Forks. This plan was developed and written and approved in 2007. Last year, we were able to take that plan off the shelf and really see how to implement it. During that process, we learned a few things, so we contracted with Buren and Associates and decided to make some improvements. What we're looking at doing to that water supply, or that drought management plan is revamp how we identify each particular phase of drought management. We've got phase 1 through 5, and that we want to be able to conserve water and reduce water use throughout that phasing. There's a couple different indicators that go into how we determine what phase we're in, and those are the Palmer Drought Severity Index, the Standard precipitation index, stream flows, and reservoir levels. And that would help us determine what phase we were in to be able to determine how much water we needed to reduce. We also have to consider developing a plan so that if we have an emergency for our infrastructure, a large water main break, or something happens with one of our water towers, we'll have a plan that we can be able to implement within our community to be able to assist in those circumstances as well. Do you have any more on this one? The next one, I can let Steve talk to, but this is just an overview of how the phasing would work.
And we are still in the process of completing the draft of the revised plan, but we did want to get some information before you, given all of the questions that have come up. The 5 phases that we have endorsed from the previous plan, we're planning to continue with, but we're looking at adding a little more teeth to the plan and being a little more specific on how we approach things. If we look at water use in Grand Forks, and I'm going to grossly simplify this, probably the 3 best way to look at this would be 3 buckets. One would be necessary or critical water use for domestic purposes, so drinking water, bathing, cleaning, some of those type of things. And then one of the major needle movers on water use is outdoor water use, so lawn watering, car washing, those type of things. And then in Grand Forks, not in all communities, but in Grand Forks, you do have a very substantial component of industrial use in the community with J.R. Simplot and some of the others. And so what you can see here is kind of using color, pictures worth 1,000 words, to try to demonstrate how we'd implement things from a drought perspective. And so in the phase 1, which we are in today, we always are going to be cognizant of conservation. We're always going to be cognizant of looking at low plumbing use fixtures and those type of things, and having people be sensitive to not putting too much water on their lawn. And then as we move into a drier and drier event, you can see that we keep up some of those baseline type activities, but then we really try to get at the non-critical water use, the outdoor water use and the industrial use. And so as we get to phase 3, we would look at a mandatory restriction where we'd start putting in different tools to implement a reduction in outdoor water use, either odd even or weekly lawn watering as things get worse and worse. And on the industrial side, we start asking them to curtail some of their use. When we get to phase 4, we use kind of a strange term of mandatory/ban. What we're looking at there is that it would be a mandatory reduction, and that if somebody were capable of moving their annual shutdown into the drought period or something like, that they could look at a voluntary shutdown. And then when we get to that phase 5 emergency, you'd be looking at having the teeth to eliminate outdoor water use, which is going to be very impactful to your lawns, but necessary. And then also, as I understand it, putting teeth into your utility agreements so you could also eliminate industrial use in the community. And we will be coming back to you with some additional information on this, but this is Grand Forks' part of interfacing with the Red River Valley Water Supply Project, and it really does 2 things. One, we anticipate that you'd be into some of these phases before you ever turn to the project. So when you nominated, we always use the metaphor of a church and Christmas and Easter. You did not nominate for Christmas and Easter, if we compare that to a church. You nominated for a more reasonable demand, recognizing that you have this plan in place. In addition, whether it happened currently, where you don't have the project in place, or whether the project, heaven forbid, proved to be inadequate at some point because of a drought worse than the 1930s, which is certainly possible, this shows how you'd walk through things in order to curtail your water use down to just necessary water use in the future. And we'll be back before you to present the final results of the revisions in the future.
Finally, Council President Sandy, we're certainly willing to take any questions. You have all the professionals here that can do that. Obviously, Red River Valley Water Supply Project is an important project. It's one of our #1 priorities, as noted. I think the important part of the PPA, the partnership agreement, is that Fargo and Grand Forks really need to cooperate and collaborate. And if you peruse the document itself, it highlights what Fargo needs to do to return flow so that we can, on a secondary basis, we can have enough flow through Grand Forks and treat their return flows. I would say the other thing that the city council has moved forward over the last decade is the water treatment plant. The water treatment plant was really important for, number one, increasing capacity and also advancing our treatment technology. So no matter what kind of water was going to come our way down the Red River, we had an adaptable and robust treatment system in our water treatment plant to do that. So it's really important that we got that done in advance of the Red River Valley water supply, not only for the city of Grand Forks, but we may become a regional distributor of water longer term also. Again, I think we are at the right time. Mary talked about Senator Sorvag, who we anticipate taking over for Senator Holmberg as the Senate Appropriations Chair. And he's been there for a long time and has been a friend not only to Fargo, but to Grand Forks and the state of North Dakota. And I think he's going to move forward quite well. We'll certainly have to lean on the House side with Representative Sanford, who's also on appropriations, and Representative Mock, that's also on appropriations for our group. And we anticipate even in Grand Forks on the Senate appropriations side that we'll have an additional senator that will replace Senator Holmberg. We won't have the advantage of having the chair, but we anticipate having another appropriations member as part of that. And again, the drought management and demand reduction plan is something that we're working to update. And I think we try to show the 2015 demands with Fufang, because we know eventually, as part of our own development agreement with Fufang, if we continue to move forward with the project, we're going to have a utility agreement that's going to use a lot of this information as part of that utility agreement. We've had many discussions with Fufang. They completely understand that as part of their utility agreement, that they're going to have to be curtailed with water when moments of truth do occur, and they completely understand that, and we will formalize that as part of the agreement as we move forward. So with that, Council President Sandy, we would certainly stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan, and everyone for that amazing presentation. Any questions? Mr. V, question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into too much depth, but I do want to also recognize the efforts of the Garrison team for all the work that we're doing for a lot of years. That a lot of hard work has done, a lot of progress has been made. I don't think we ever want to fall short of what's happened and getting us here to date. I'd also like to thank you, Mr. Sandy, Mr. Phelan, and others for helping get this put together so we could have the thoroughness of the presentations that we have. There probably will be, I know there will be some additional questions that are going to arise. Obviously, this is not black and white or cut and dried for the things that are there. It was especially nice to have Elisa Brown on. I've not met her before, but the work that she and others have done has been tremendous, I think. So maybe what I would do is ask a few of the questions, just a few of them here with Lisa Brown, and I tried to make comments on each page, but page 7 had to do with the modeling tool. And Lisa, I know we talked about first in time, first right appropriation system, but the fact that Grand Forks is between Minnesota and North Dakota, and Minnesota has different state law than North Dakota does. Did you use Minnesota law on the east side and North Dakota law on the west side as you looked at the entire basin?
Yeah, so for Minnesota, we took basically a conservative assumption that they would continue to operate under sort of a riparian regime. And we set all of the Minnesota users that are represented in the model as senior to North Dakota users.
Oh, okay, thank you. I think.
Yeah, and just to build on that, then to also try and complete the kind of Minnesota picture, we also implemented the I believe Minnesota refers to them as their Q90 flows. So that would be minimum stream flow requirements that when during a period of drought, if a tributary to the Red River drops below a certain flow threshold, then users in Minnesota are cut off in order to maintain those Q90 flows through the tributaries in Minnesota.
Okay. And would you maybe, I think this is a fairly important issue, talk about your sensitivity analysis and what, a little bit more depth of what that means. It sounds like you're able to help validate the results of your assumptions. Could you maybe talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. So when sort of the Red River Valley Water Supply Project kind of took on the state modeling effort, we kind of had a couple of questions for how the reclamation model had originally been set up. So some of the key parameters that we started to look at to say, in that sensitivity analysis, trying to see, was there a large response in the model output depending on how we set the parameter, which means that the model would be very important for us to make sure that we 100% nailed down exactly what that parameter needed to be. Or if we kind of spun the dial between low and high, the model sort of gave about the same answer either way. So that's kind of where we were performing the sensitivity analysis to try and understand which parameters were critical and which parameters perhaps kind of the model we needed to have in there, but the model wasn't particularly sensitive to them. So some of the parameters that we looked at sort of in the 2017-2018 period when we were really revamping, making sure that we were getting the model up to date, up to speed, was looking at the assumptions around irrigation users that are represented in the model. You know, for the most part, people are not diverting large amounts of water for irrigation, but that is a use that's represented in the model to correspond with irrigation permits. So we wanted to make sure that we had the consumptive use, the timing of those demands correct. We also examined some of the industrial users and really looking at their efficiency, what was the consumptive portion of their diversions compared to the return flows. And really that was diving a little bit more into the permit database to make sure we understood the type of industrial user that we were including in the model, and making sure that we had appropriate representation for them. Those were some of the major ones that we looked at. And then we also kind of did a suite of sensitivity analyses similar to what we just completed with Grand Forks, was sitting down with the city of Fargo and exploring a range of future conditions, future demand conditions for Fargo, to make sure we understood, you know, if the population projections were a little bit lower or a little bit higher, or if the industrial use was a little bit lower or a little bit higher, how did that impact the estimates of project supplies and the pipeline sizing.
Along those lines, is irrigation a significant factor?
It turned out to not be a significant player in the model.
Okay.
Which was a surprise for me, because in Colorado, irrigated agriculture is the big user. But as it turns out, most of the irrigation in North Dakota that we were looking at only uses diversions from surface water as a small portion of the supplemental supply. So that ended up not being a major driver for use in the model.
Okay. If I could, if we could go to page 13, I think this is kind of a key number of questions I would have having to do with the project, key project participate. Just a question, you have Red Lake River before Red River. That was surprising.
And that has to do with two things. First is the order of the permits for Grand Forks. The permit for Red Lake water is slightly senior to the permit for Red River water. So we're going for the Red Lake water first. And then also through conversations with the plant operators, my understanding is that they prefer to try and keep a blend between the two supplies so that their water quality concerns at the treatment plant are as consistent as possible. But for the model, we're sort of picking Red Lake first, Red River second. But I think you'll see in the results that we displayed, there's always unless there is no Red Lake River, there's always a blend of supplies from those two sources.
President Sandy, Councilmember Vian, just a couple other things to add on that. During our day, Ken, when we worked on this, Grand Forks used 60% red and 40% Red Lake. Since then, the water quality degradation of the Red River for a variety of reasons, and then some peculiarities in the, I didn't say that quite right, but peculiarities in the Red Lake River have made Grand Forks transition where you use 90% Red Lake River and only 10% red. So it's actually very consistent with your current usage pattern. In addition, if we go back to the federal project which laid the foundation for all this, because the Red Lake River is a fairly copious supply, the Bureau actually pushed Grand Forks over to the Red Lake to try to optimize the Red River during that time. And so I think that thought process has carried its way through at this point in time.
Yeah, and Steve, I think I understand that from the quality standard. The volume will be less though on the Red Lake River than on the Red River.
And so if I may continue, President Sandy, Councilmember Vian, it's not that we're foregoing the red, it's just while there's Red Lake River water there, we would use it, and then you'd switch to the red as the next pecking order. The drawback is we don't have any place to store water except Lake Ashtabula. So as water flows over the Lowhead Dam for the Red Lake River and flows over the Lowhead Dam for the Red River, we get one chance at it and then it goes to Winnipeg. And so the model just suggests that you'd exhaust your Red Lake River supply and then turn to the Red River.
Yeah. And my error here, I was looking at it as far as volumes, not quality here, and how you run the water treatment plant. We know that, I still go back to 2012 drought, when in that 2-month period, we went from 850 CFS down to 50 CFS in the Red Lake River in 2-month period, not through a prolonged drought, and the low flow that was in the Red Lake River. I'm just concerned about how that might fit in when you start looking at water availability. The other question I have is Fargo return flows. That's a fairly broad question about how much is available from Fargo return flows. How are we calculating that?
So we have worked with Fargo to develop an estimate of how consumptive their domestic users would be and how consumptive their industrial users would be. So when we're running the model with the project scenario, then we're showing the return flows that are being generated from all of their supplies, and then tracking that in the Red River, using the model to track that in the Red River so that we can evaluate how much of those return flows are boosting the flows in the river by the time you get down to Grand Forks. So the numbers that we've got in the model for Fargo have been developed in collaboration with the folks at Fargo.
President Sandy, Councilmember Vian, if I continue to add some more color, the way that they looked at Fargo's return flows under the federal project, and then we moved that forward under the state project, was merely to look at how much water does Fargo bring in, how much water does Fargo discharge. And so that Fargo was basically making a commitment for that type of flow. We went through the 3 no project scenarios in May that were done. The other activity that was done in May is we asked Lisa to try to figure out if Grand Forks wanted to ask for more industrial water, how much could you ask for? And right now you've asked for 13.8 CFS of industrial water. We asked Lisa, given everything else being equal, if Grand Forks asked for 22.5 CFS, would we be okay? Yes. Jumped up to another 7.5 CFS, which happens to be 5 MGD. If we asked for 30, would we be okay? Yes. If we asked for 37.5, would we be okay? Yes. If we asked for 45 CFS, we would be okay. 45 is starting to look a lot like Blair, Nebraska, in terms of if you won the lottery and got everything that Blair, Nebraska has, that would be about a 45 CFS system. You're still okay. It got tedious. We asked Lisa the other thing, bust the project for us. So if Fargo continues to return water like it's returning right now, and even with no Red Lake River water, you could nominate for 73 CFS of industrial water at Grand Forks with the project and still be okay. I don't see Grand Forks doing that. And so one thing that's happening right now is I do think the city of Fargo is going to ratchet down their promises for return flows a little bit so that they can have some more wastewater reuse capability at their community, but they're also going to be sensitive to the numbers that you need in Grand Forks, and we're going to try to find a sweet spot in between those two where there's lots of available industrial water at Fargo and there's a lot of available industrial water at Grand Forks.
Dana, I'm going to try to cut this short. I could ask a few more.
Mr. Veen, it's...
Mr. Buren, one other quick question here. In order to discharge our wastewater or effluent from the water plant, is there a requirement of how much water you would need going basically over the dam to be able to properly combine fresh water with wastewater?
President Sandy, Councilmember Vian, the simple answer is yes, and I know that's not what you're looking for. The complicated answer is that your existing permit for wastewater requires you to look at biochemical oxygen demand, suspended solids, pH, which is really the more classic wastewater measures of how you discharge water. And so there has to be enough water in the river and enough dissolved oxygen in that river to assimilate the wastewater that you discharge that's more classic wastewater. You also added a reverse osmosis train to your water treatment plant, which about 70% of that reverse osmosis train goes through as permeate, about 30% is trapped on the dirty side of the membrane as concentrate. That now isn't solids and biochemical oxygen demand, it's total dissolved solids, so like salinity. And the river also only has so much assimilation capacity for salinity. And so the way your RO discharge is configured is you need a certain amount of flow in the river to also wed with that.
Okay. All right, thank you. Mr. Sandy,
Mr.
you want me to ask
Dean,
more questions?
You're welcome to ask as many questions as you'd like.
No, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Thank you. Thank you. So I think the end result, Mr. Veland, is under a 30-style drought, we run out of water. Regardless of how many people there are here, there's no water that's flowing. And so in order to make sure that we have water for our community members and any future industrial users, we should support the Red River Valley Water Supply Project from the legislature, and our 25% funding is.
And we looked at it in current day in 2075. Obviously, none of us are going to be here in 2075, but really it's a legacy project. It's a once in 100-year project, and we're at the moment of truth of, I think, moving it forward and getting it complete and looking back at the 1930s after all these decades and finally getting the project done.
Great. Thank you.
President Sandy?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Just a quick point, this has already been stated, but the city's legislative priority list, we first have transportation projects as the top, but our next item is water, and at the last session and this session, the only project we have there is the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. It's our top water project, our second highest legislative priority after, it's the next one after transportation. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weber.
I think the next big thing we didn't talk about tonight, and Mary Meridian mentioned it, is we're probably going to be our capital investments on the order of 30 to 40 million. We're going to make our first debt service payment under a previous agreement this month, and so I think part of the next discussion will be that debt service payment. Should we look at incorporating that as part of our sales tax with water and roads that we approved? And again, that's a 20-year sunset. We're looking at our rates and what those impacts. So we'll bring those back as part of the PPA moving forward, just so you know what the rate impacts are and maybe what we can leverage with some of our sales tax as we move forward. I have been told by the city of Fargo is intending to renew their sales tax and to pay for their share of the Red River Valley Water Supply with sales tax, just as an FYI. But that'll be a lot of discussion, and I just want to forewarn you, we got a lot of information that's going to come your way over the next few months.
Great, thank you, Mr. Phelan. Appreciate it. Moving on, item 2.8, Grand Forks Regional Workforce Development Strategy Update and Overview. Mr. Phelan.
Yes, I think this was the
And
second.
we should say thank you to all of the folks that attended both online and came to the meeting tonight. We really do appreciate all the efforts related to the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. Thank you. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
think, Council President, the second item for discussion is workforce development, and I know this also ties in with the Food Farm project, but it ties in broader. So we're going to have two presenters. Haley Rosasson, our HR manager, is going to verbally discuss some of the things that we're doing on behalf of the city of Grand Forks that I think will have a regional impact. And then we've asked the Grand Forks Region EDC to talk about the broader regional and statewide what's going on. So Becca Kruger from our EDC and Keith Lund are here, so they're going to present the broader view, but I've asked Haley to give you a heads up on what we're doing for the city of Grand Forks.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Good evening, Haley.
Good evening, President Sandy and members of the committee. From the last 5 years, the city's really been focusing on talent acquisition of city employees. One way we've been doing this is focusing on students in both the high school and in college. So we've been really targeting through 3 different steps. The first step is career awareness, exploration, and preparation. So through awareness, we've been working with the K through 12 on career education of those different city items we have. And we've been doing that through junior achievement, getting in the classroom, along with the Northern Valley Career Expo, providing those hands-on opportunities. And then also doing tours at the different facilities we have, along with the career fairs. The other items under exploration are, we've been doing the job shadowing, along with participating in the career conversations events. And then also hosting some high school internships, a lot through our public works divisions. And then through our preparation, we've really been focusing on those more hands-on projects or internships where everyone's aware that we have our internship program with UND where we've hosted 120 interns and hired 25 on as full-time employees. We've also had 3 participants through the Department of Defense Skill Bridge opportunities where we've hosted those individuals on their last 6 months of service in the military. And then with potential of hiring if they're interested after their separation of service. We've also had the opportunity to host 2 graduate student traineeships through the UND graduate program through the Accelerate to Industry program. That allows us to have those students work on hands-on projects that are in their field of study. We've focused on UAS through the fire department, and then also a workforce development curriculum for the Tech Accelerator. We've also hosted many different group projects, one through the mathematics department, focusing on traffic modeling, and another on the university corridor study. Now we are also focusing on apprenticeship programs through the state of North Dakota and getting an approved program for our waterworks division, and then also trailing that down into our public works equipment operators, where we also are doing a CDL program with the new requirements. And then we've also been able to be a part of the CIA curriculum input along with launching that upskilling program. So that will be hosted at the Tech Accelerator next spring, but we are doing a soft opening for our city employees to hopefully help them with any promotional opportunities in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Lund, good evening.
Good evening, President Sandy, members of the committee. Pleasure to be here this evening to visit about one of my 2 favorite subjects, workforce, the other one being business development. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about the mission of the Grand Forks Region EDC, which is to expand economic opportunity for the citizens of the Grand Forks region. We don't spend enough time talking about our vision, which is to work collaboratively in the region to attract innovative people and business investment to Grand Forks County. And we take workforce, business attraction, and business retention extremely seriously. I joined the EDC in 2006, and I think it's fair to say at that time that we pretty much exclusively focused on business development. Near the end of that decade, we started to lean in a little bit on workforce. We did some strategic planning, did some demographic analysis, stakeholder interviews, and took a look at some best practice. And I think the two things that really came out of that effort was, number one, the Northern Valley Career Expo, where we're introducing this year, it looks like close to 2,000 students to growing careers in the region, and then also helped work with the Young Professionals Organization, sort of build up that organization to where they hired a full-time executive director to try to engage young professionals in our community to focus on retention and attraction, but mostly on retention. I assumed the role of president in 2017, and at that time our board was really having a conversation about how to have a greater impact when it comes to workforce. Not many months after that, the board agreed that we should hire somebody specifically to focus on workforce development in the region. You know that person today is Becca Kruger, our Director of Workforce Development, and I'm going to ask her to come up in a moment to go through a presentation. She'll provide an overview of the workforce programming that we have that's focused on the workforce pipeline. So it's K through 12, post-secondary, retention and attraction of talent. Becca works with a lot of partners in the region, and as a matter of fact, there's really nothing that we do at the EDC that isn't focused on partnerships. That said, I really want to acknowledge her leadership in this area. Most of what she will present today did not exist when she joined the EDC 5 years ago, and that's not a coincidence of timing. Her leadership has been recognized across the state of North Dakota as well. Just this year, Governor Burgum appointed Becca to the North Dakota Workforce Development Council, where she works around with industry and state leaders to develop a workforce strategy for the state of North Dakota. And in case you missed it just recently, Becca also leads an internationally recognized talent attraction initiative as well. Your $10 million investment in 2017 and 2000 investment into what we now know as Cooler leveraged $100,000 investment from other public and pseudo-public entities and over $200,000 investment from the public sector, from the private sector, I should say, to help sustain and grow that initiative. The program, specifically the website dedicated to talent attraction, took the top award as the best practice at their International Economic Development Council's annual conference just last month. So with that, I'd like to invite Becca up here to walk through some of the workforce programming that's been implemented and ongoing today.
Thank you, Mr. Lund. Good evening, Ms. Kruger.
Good evening, Mayor Buczynski, President Sandy, members of the council. Thank you for having me. It's not often after an introduction like that I would get up here and correct my boss. But I do want to say for the record, it wasn't a $10 million investment from you, it was a $20,000 investment. Might be important. Anyhow, I'm going to talk about my favorite subject, which is workforce, and that's something that's certainly on the minds of everyone who lives in Grand Forks County, but also across the nation. Grand Forks is doing some really proactive things. A lot of it's spurred by partners, as Keith mentioned, like the city, the Chamber, Job Service North Dakota, University of North Dakota, and Northland. And I'm going to talk about some of those things for your situational awareness. We've been really proactive in addressing some of the workforce challenges here. 10 years ago, Keith mentioned we launched the Northern Valley Career Expo. That is coming up on October 26th. It's actually our 10-year anniversary, and I would encourage you all to stop out during the day, and you'll see over 2,000 high schoolers from over 40 different high schools attending the Northern Valley Career Expo, and that's across 14 counties. And what they're doing is coming to learn about hands-on career activities put on by those employers in those 14 counties. So not only are they learning about possible careers that they might want to go into, but they're also learning about the employers that exist here. This is a map of where all of those students are coming from for the day in Grand Forks. And also, what I'm really proud of is 82% of students who come to the expo start seeing our region in a different light. They say that they're more likely to pursue careers in the region after having been to the expo. And that's based on surveys that we do at the end every year. Also, across the pipeline that I'm going to talk about from K-12 all the way up to post-grad, and then retention of the folks that we have here. In the high school space, it's not just the expo that we're hitting. Many of you know Mr. Eric Ripley, the Director of Career and Technical Education. He's also the Director of the Area Career and Technical Education Center that serves 7 different schools across the region.
And through the CTE at Grand Forks Public Schools, they offer 52 different career exploration courses. Of course, you're going to hear about the Career Impact Academy and how that's building on what's already been done. But as the city mentioned, you guys are pursuing internships with high school students, and through his office, that's where that would be set up. Through this program and through the Career Impact Academy that's going to be built, we are going to be able to have students earning degrees or degree programmings and dual credits, certifications while they're still in high school, and being introduced to those careers and employers in the region while they're still here. The Career Impact Academy, I'll talk a little bit about the funding for that. As you know, we're on a brief pause while the feds release the funds from the grant that we've written. But we are doing some proactive things at the state level that I'll be talking about a little bit later to make sure that this is a project that continues to move forward for our community. Additionally, for those folks who don't want to go on to a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree after college, our job service chapter is excellent at interfacing with industry, and they have several programs that help fund apprenticeships and other things in the region, like classroom instruction or on-the-job training. So that is definitely an option that's here in our region and that Mary Hodak at our job service office heads up. They offer reimbursement up to 50% of wages for those folks who want to do on-the-job training for new or expanding employees in the region. Career conversations, this is now moving into the college bit of the workforce pipeline. This is something that was launched by the Chamber in partnership with the EDC, Job Service North Dakota, Northland, UND, and a host of other partners. And this gets students off our campuses. We have about 35,000 students within a 1-hour drive in our college campuses here. And it gets students off campus and into those employers for a one-on-one conversation about the types of careers. This actually is a great success story. This gal on the right side of the screen is Katie Sharfie. She was a human resources major, and she went to Black Gold Farms, that's Tammy Martin at Black Gold Farms, for a career conversation. That led to an internship in human resources. After Katie graduated, she was hired on by Black Gold Farms, and then she started a series of internship programs, including a brand new micro internship program. And there's a lot of stories like that coming out of career conversations. It's a great thing that we have to get students introduced to our employers. Again, 61% of the students who attended a career conversation and filled out our survey said they're more likely to consider careers in the region as a result of that program. Additionally, one of the areas when I first came on to the EDC that I saw as a weakness in our region was the lack of internships and local employers participating in internships. I used to serve as the assistant director of the Pancratz Career Development Center in UND's Nistler College of Business. And I would have students who would walk into my office and say, I want a career, or I want an internship in X, Y, or Z. And I would say, great, go to Fargo, go to Minneapolis, because they don't exist here. So that was a bit of our workforce pipeline that was broken. So the state offers a program called Operation Intern that offers up to $20,000 a year to employers for up to 5 years or 5 interns that they want to establish. And so we looked at that as a model that could be done locally as well. So Intern Grand Forks was launched. It's a program funded by the UND Center for Innovation. And I have to say UND's administration is very forward thinking in this. Our employers, startup organizations can get up to 50% reimbursement for a new internship, and EDC members can get up to 33% reimbursement for an internship. What's really great about this program is over the 4 years that this has been in operation, we've launched 70 brand new internships in the region, and also the students who go through really do build those deep connections. This is a great example. This was Connor. He interned at Thread, formerly known as Airtonomy, and he did a software engineering internship with them. There's many interns who have gone on then to be employed at those companies. In 2021, when we completed our survey, 80% of those students had been hired on by that employer they interned with or another Grand Forks company. So that was really great for us to see. This is not something that's been brand new in the last 5 years. The campus career centers, they are excellent at getting our students into in front of employers. For employers in our region, they offer really front door service. You can go in, you can host career days on their campus, you can host on-site interviews. There's a lot that they're doing that really connects employers and students in the region. In fact, about 1,200 students go through the UND Career Expo. And I will say, for any local employers who are out there, you should be attending that. I think there's some low participation for Grand Forks employers, and that's a shame when we have a state-of-the-art research facility here, or research university here in Grand Forks. Also launched about 2 years ago, the Dean of the College of Business, Chris Nelson, launched Accelerate to Industry. We have a number of excellent graduate students in the region who want to go and work in the private sector. So the Accelerate to Industry program really focuses on connecting those postdoctoral students to careers. And they do that in a couple of ways. Chris and his crew over there, or Dean Nelson and his crew over there, can stand up entire teams to help you tackle industry-led problems. So if you're looking to do a market research for a new product, or you're looking for a new product development and you want to do some testing, if you need a new marketing plan put together for your organization, there's so many graduate level students with excellent expertise who can help you with that through the Accelerate to Industry program. But we can't graduate students and have them stay here and not retain them. And we also need to be looking externally for our talent right now. We have a lot of open jobs, and 5 years ago, Grand Forks was really innovative. Keith mentioned the Greater Grand Forks Way Cooler Than You Think program. That's now a best practice across the nation. And this was actually driven by partners at the city, the county, the chamber, EDC, and then folks at Visit Greater Grand Forks too. This was a recruitment and retention initiative really designed to make sure that people are learning about all the cool things that there are to do in Grand Forks. I'm actually going to share a little story. I was at a conference 3 weeks ago, and I was talking to someone, and I was doing what I normally do, which is talk up Grand Forks, because I do love it here. I think there's incredible people and incredible opportunity. And so she got out her phone and she started Googling Grand Forks. And she hit the images tab, and inwardly I cringed until I heard her say, "Oh wow, you guys have a lot of great water features there." And I saw what she was scrolling, because 5 years ago, prior to Cooler being launched, you would have also seen a lot of great water features, like a 1997 flood and frozen water, blizzards up to your eyeballs. Those were all the images that you could find about Grand Forks. And so Cooler really is about changing the narrative and the initial misperceptions that people might have if you're trying to recruit them from Texas and California, which many of our member companies are trying to do. So it was really cool to see that in action. We launched a website that has about 25,000 unique visitors annually, and 70% of that traffic comes from outside of the Grand Forks region. We also have social media that we have very fabulous interns who help me run. And also, 2 years ago, we launched a welcoming and relocation guide. This is countywide, so it not only focuses on Grand Forks City, but also all of the communities across Grand Forks County. Since we launched that guide 2 years ago, that's been downloaded 440 times, and we've had 2,570 requests for employer-distributed copies. We also distribute copies to every new airman at the Grand Forks Air Force Base. The other thing that we do through Cooler is national digital advertising campaigns. So we spend money to not only promote the open jobs that are in the region. Every month, Job Service pulls a list of unmanned and autonomous systems careers, and then one other focus sector for the month. And we advertise those jobs across the region, across the nation, as well as information about our lifestyle. So not only are they getting hit with the jobs, but they're saying, what is Grand Forks all about as well? And those are targeted to areas of the country that have high concentration of UND alumni, or those boomerangers that we know have ties to the area. Additionally, at the state level, through the Governor's Workforce Development Council, there's some great things happening in the sphere of talent and workforce. I'm going to share with you some of the recommendations, just 3 that are coming out that I think you should be aware of, because this is a conversation that's not just happening at the local level, but we're providing leadership at the state level and working with our state leaders as well. If you're not familiar with the Workforce Development Council, these are the folks who currently sit on it. It's led by the incredible Katie Ralston-Howe from the Department of Commerce Workforce Division. There's been 3 priority subcommittees that have been meeting over the last 2 years in preparation for the legislative session. One focused on recruitment and retention of talent, one focused on career exploration, and one focused on removing barriers for folks who want to enter the workforce. So the first recommendation that I'll talk about is a recommendation that has been approved and is on the governor's desk to fund $10 million for a talent attraction and retention initiatives. So recently you may have heard that the state relaunched the Find the Good Life initiative. What they've done is not only created a marketing campaign, but it's trackable and measurable. They can tell you not just who's visiting their website, but the name of each person, their resume, and they're connecting them. They've trained up 40 community champions across the state of North Dakota. And so every time that somebody comes through that relocation help desk, they're connected directly. So I am one of those community champions and have received 6 people in the 2.5 months that it's been launched. So that's pretty cool to see. I had one guy drive all the way from Oregon, and I toured him around Town Square and the farmers market, and another couple that's coming up from Texas in a couple of weeks. So the second recommendation that I wanted to talk about was a mechanism to support locally developed workforce solutions. The state launched something similar to this. It was called RWIP, or Regional Workforce Impact Program. And there's never been funding at the state level for locally driven workforce solutions. So if you go to the state and say, I have this great idea for talent retention or attraction, there's not funding for that. So we were just a Region 4 given $1.7 million or allocated, and so we've written a grant, and most of that is going to go towards child care, addressing child care needs in our region. And then the last recommendation that I really wanted to talk coming out of the Workforce Development Council is funding the operations and programming of new and expanding area career and technology centers. So as you may know, the Career Impact Academy, that was some federal level funding, and we were told that those grants would be reviewed and we would have funds in hand no later than June of this year. It is now October of this year, and they still have not been fully reviewed. Meanwhile, there's rising costs and escalation in inflation. And so that makes it much harder to build today what we wrote the grant for. So through the state, we are asking that they allocate the $88 million that was originally awarded through state funds, and then also $40 million inflation escalation on top of that. So that is also something that is coming out of the Workforce Development Council's recommendations this year. What I really want to get across to you is that we are not just sitting on our heels when it comes to workforce, and it really requires a multi-pronged approach. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's my job to really look at what's happening across the pipeline, where we're weak, and where we have workforce needs, and try to address and solve some of those. As Keith said, most of these programs, with the exception of 2, are all brand new within the last 5 years. And I wanted to show you this too. It's working. We're seeing some successes. I know a lot of people like to think it's all gloom and doom when it comes to workforce, but I just want to show you this growth of 25 to 39-year-olds in our region. It's pretty huge. We've seen an 18% growth overall across those age demographics. And that's really promising for us. And that's something that shows us that what we're doing and what we're investing in is working. We're continuing to see population growth here in Grand Forks. And we need to double down. We can't ignore the fact that we do have workforce challenges, and we need to continue to be proactive. So that's my presentation, and I'll stand for any questions.
It's really impressive. Becca, thank you so much for what you're doing for our community. Any questions for Ms. Kruger? Thank you again. Thank you very much, and thanks, of course, to EDC. You're doing an amazing job. I guess item 3, council member comments. Anything for the good of the order tonight? Anyone have anything to add? Is there a motion to adjourn by Kavami, second by Osowski? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We're adjourned. Thanks.